Hello, writers. I'm Josiane Fartin, and today I'm so glad to be interviewing Neil Mach. Neil is the self-published author of 12 books, and so please tell us a little bit about you.
Thank you, Josiane. Well, I'm an English grandfather. I was born in the year that rock and roll was invented.
Okay.
I retired after a lifetime of law enforcement. I married Sue in 1981. We have two daughters, which are both married. I've got two grandchildren, Griff and Ari. I live in Surrey in England, which is a bit along the River Thames from Windsor Castle, if anybody knows it. During my law enforcement career, I helped to disrupt international organised crime gangs. And towards the end of my career, I started thinking about writing. I wrote my first novel for NaNoWriMo in 2012. And I think I wanted to kind of make sense of my life experiences. So I tend to write stories that are based on loyalty and on duty, because that's obviously the stuff that engined my life.
But you don't write mysteries or crime books. You write fantasy.
Yeah, I mean, you'd expect me to, wouldn't you? But I think that would be too close to home. So I think that's, and I'm a very fanciful person as well. So I have flights of fancy, which obviously didn't go particularly well in the criminology side of things, because you have to be exact. But obviously, breaking away from that, I wanted to kind of fly free. Through my life, my role models have largely been strong women. So to give you an example, I enrolled in a stage dance school when I was 5, and I was the only boy in the shows. So I was the Billy Elliot type character, if people know that. And the sports boys, the jocks would make fun of me. But of course, I had lots of female friends. And I was raised in a household of strong women. I've got 3 sisters. My father, who was also a cop, he wasn't around very much. And obviously, being married and having 2 more daughters, my world is surrounded by strong women, and that's been an important part of my life as well. My main interest, apart from reading and writing, by the way, is music, and I've been a singer in stage shows, obviously when I was in the theatre school, but I've been a professional DJ. I played guitar in a band. I was a music promoter, and from 2007 I've been writing articles for music magazines, so I do that as well as doing the fiction.
Okay, so you're very creative. Your career was not fulfilling that side, I'm guessing.
Yeah, that's brilliantly put.
So what brought you to write the very first book? Was it just like a lifelong dream? Was it a second career for you? How did you envision that?
Yeah, that's good. A good way of asking me. It was important for me to write because music is such a big part of my life, and it had been since the age of 5. And I wanted to ask a question, and that was, what would the world be like if music was banned? And for example, around about that time, popular music was becoming banned in places like Afghanistan and Iran. Some other extremist states were starting to sort of close the idea of popular music down. So I decided I wanted to write about an imaginary world where the authorities wanted to kill musicians and eradicate music. And also that would also bring in, of course, duty and loyalty. So I wrote a book called The Last Music Barrier, and it's about a monk, and it's set in the future medieval Europe, and he's the last musician to be alive. And that sort of ticked enough of my boxes that I needed to have ticked at the time.
Good. And how long did it take you to write this very first book?
Well, like I hinted, I wrote that for NaNoWriMo, so 30 days sitting at the typewriter of an old typewriter, ribbon and bell type of thing. But of course, even though readers think that that's what writing is about, it isn't really, is it? It's about conjuring an original thought and then typing out and then editing it. So the original thought probably entered my mind a couple or 3 years before that, and the editing process took far longer because of my first book. It took far longer than I expected. So I think I'd had to edit it 7 times before it was readable. So yeah. So I think all in all, 3 years.
Okay. So during NaNoWriMo, did you actually write the 50 words and that was it? That was the first draft was all done?
Yeah, I wrote 56,000 words straight off, but obviously it's a bit, all of the original idea or the original theme was there. But then of course, the actual every day you've got to think of how your character walks into a room, or you've got to imagine how your character moves from A to B, haven't you? So that's the burning thing, isn't it? That's the difficult thing. Yeah.
Yes, because you have the big pieces and then you have to put it all together with smaller pieces so that it works. And that's something I wanted to talk about, because you say you're you're good at planning like a book series. I saw that in your profile. So
Thank you.
like any advice that you could give me on, because I have in my mind a 7-book series about like a fantasy and would be like a young adult thing. And how do you plan like things that will happen and then like cliffhangers, but still have a satisfying book within itself? Like any advice on that?
Well, the first thing you've just said then is absolutely crucial. You must have a book finale cliffhanger, but obviously that comes after. It's a bit odd because you would never do that in an ordinary self-contained novel, but the cliffhanger comes after the satisfying conclusion of that particular story. And I recommend you have another what I call cliff perch halfway through the book, so that it gives the readers a chance to understand that you're going to be teasing them a little bit more later on, so it doesn't come as a nasty shock at the end. But you've got to have that cliffhanger because you want them to have to, they really must want to buy that next book. But I think you must have a sustainable central conflict, so something like Harry versus Voldemort, or the Empire versus the Rebel Alliance, something which you can write about for a whole 7, because you're talking about possibly 350,000 words. It could take, I mean, if you detect my anxious tone in my voice, I don't want to discourage you, but it's possibly going to be a 3 or 4 or even 7-year project. So you need to have something which is going to be sustainable through that. The great thing is you have got the room to create a beautiful and satisfyingly immersive world, which is worthy of exploration. So you can put that extra level of detail that perhaps somebody who's going to be stuck at 80,000 words can't do. And you can also flesh out your principal characters over episodic time. And one of the things I think is an advantage to a series is that you don't need to have any information dumps at all. Because if you think about it, you don't need to have a prologue. You don't need any epilogues, because you can explain everything in episodic stories all the way across the series. So if you feel like you're doing information dumps, then just add that to book 1. I reckon that's what happened with George Lucas, but by the way, he had to keep going back and say, actually, that wasn't actually the first episode. I just realized what the first episode was. The only other thing I would recommend to you is think about your naming conventions quite early on, because you'll want to have series words and you'll want to have series titles, which all obviously fit together nicely. And people don't think about those until halfway through, and it's too late then. And would you be doing a conventional novel size, like 50,000 words, or would it be shorter?
Around 50,000. I'm more of a writer that writes less words. Like I have a hard time expanding on my ideas, just like goes from point A to point B. Okay, sorry, done. But then like what happens? What do you think is the essential ingredient of fantasy?
Well, the essential ingredient is to move from the world we live in now, the present, this world, to the other world, and explore the place in between, which is the liminal space in between. So every single fantasy must have that as an ingredient. So for example, in the Lion, Witch and the Wardrobe, obviously the family go through the wardrobe, or in Alice in Wonderland, she moves through the mirror or down the hole to get to the other world. And it's that moving across, which is the important part, because we all do that in our own lives. We do have these moments of liminal activity. So for example, when it's your first day at school and you don't quite fit in and you don't really feel right, but you're not, you can't go back to the small school, you've got to go forward, but you're stuck in this liminal space. Or perhaps if you're marrying in the morning and it's your wedding the night before, so you're living with your parents that last night, but you can't go back, you're going to get married in the morning. It's a liminal moment, and that's what you need to explore in any fantasy. So another example is then the Hobbits and in the Lord of the Rings. If you remember, both Frodo and Bilbo leave their homes in Hobbiton on their birthday, because birthdays, especially big birthdays, are a liminal moment. 21st birthday and 18th birthday are very liminal moments. Or Luke Skywalker, he has to move from his home, in the ranch, and he has to go into space. And that's the bit that I think is absolutely essential in fantasy.
Okay, so going like
That movement
crossing
from
a door to
yes,
another place.
yeah. So from it's and almost touching that border as best you can, almost touching it and trying to feel it. You know, when you walk into a church and it feels sacred because it's just slightly different, or you're just about to enter a graveyard or a cemetery, and you know that there's a little bit of difference between that and the world that we normally inhabit. People say, is there if I'm not religious, people said to me, is there a liminal space that you can think of? And I always say yes. Imagine a fun fair at night and there's no children laughing and joking, and it suddenly feels quite ghostly and quite eerie because that's the liminal space. It's not quite what it should be. That's the thing you need to try to create in your work.
Okay, I don't think I'm that in touch with my emotions. Like it sounds like you have this intuition and you get in touch with like the energy of the space or something like that. So that's very great to hear about that. Do you know like top tropes, fantasy tropes that need to be in the book, like to make it satisfying for readers?
I'm not a fan of tropes, I'll be honest. I like people to be creative. I like people to be imaginative, and I almost work against tropes.
Okay.
So, for example, this whole thing about why does a wizard have to be old? Why does a wizard have to be a male? Why does an elf have to be good? Why does an elf have to be always righteous? Why can't we have evil elves, because they were originally evil anyway? And one trope which I particularly dislike is this whole orphan trope. You know, it's always an orphan. But yeah, a lot of us, like myself, I've had sisters, and we have a lovely family. But I felt quite alone a lot of the time, and could go off and have my own adventures. And I did have my own adventures, not just in my own mind, but also, you know, literal adventures, going out and exploring the world. So you can have an exploration without having to be an orphan. So, yeah, to my mind, fantasy is just about the myth and magic, and that magic of that liminal space, trying to imagine what the other world is like. And we all experience it because we all have visited the other world because we visit it in our dreams. Right. So,
great, that makes sense. What are your best productivity tips?
Well, I like using the Pomodoro technique. Did you come across that when you were working on your 1 year plan? I don't know. Did you? Yeah. I mean, what I do is divide my work up into 25-minute intervals. Each interval is separated by a short break. And each interval is known as the Pomodoro, which is the Italian word for tomato. And what I like about it is that nobody has the ability to actually concentrate on anything for more than 50 minutes. Doesn't matter how intelligent you are, 50 minutes is your absolute limit. So if you do 2 Pomodoros, which is 2 25 minutes, and then have a nice break, you can get a lot of work done, and you feel like you're being successful because you are ticking off your your to-do list.
Yeah.
A lot of people like word sprints. I don't know if you've used those. I like doing those sometimes. Then you're competing against other people.
Yeah, I'm more into being constant, like writing my 300 or 400 words every night.
Yeah.
When I'm in a rush to publish, that's what I do. Because last year I wrote a whole trilogy. That was my goal for last year. I'm not doing it this year though. But
no,
so I know I can write 3 short novels in a year. Maybe I'll try to top that some other time. Not this year.
Yeah, I mean, on NaNoWriMo, which is a great thing, and I do encourage anybody to do that, and I think everybody should give it a go. A lot of people don't make it, but I'm always amazed by the people. I don't even see them, but when they get to day 15 and they start doing the second 50,000 words, they almost do 2 marathons back to back. You know,
it's amazing. Like I never made it in NaNoWriMo. I think I did it 3 times. But every time I start a new project and every time I'm closer to publishing, because like I'm trying my best. So
yeah,
it's okay. I still feel good about participating.
Well, you should do. But there are obstacles to productivity. I think fatigue, especially, can be exacerbated by Netflix and social media and video games. And I think it's important to ration yourself with those distractions, because otherwise they can make you less productive. You certainly should eat healthily. I'm sure you do. And emotional stress as well. The other thing I always say to people is don't beat yourself up if you can't write. Some days you just can't write because you haven't got that creative spark. So don't fret about it and never force yourself to write if you can't do it that day. I'm a great believer in what the army used to call the rest and recreation, which is not only take a rest, but also do something completely different, a diversion, a diverting activity. For me, I do cooking or gardening or go for a run, physical exercise, or just do something completely different, which has nothing to do with a screen. Get away from the screen. I think that's important.
Okay, good. What do you think is the hardest thing about becoming a self-published author?
For me, it's having to view my work as a product.
Okay.
Because I can see obviously why in the past, traditionally, we've always, the author's always allowed somebody else to do that for us. They've outsourced that job. Because I don't like the idea that my art is a product which has a commercial product. It is part of me. It came out of my heart often, and I let it loose into the world. I don't feel like I want to sell it. So what I've been doing is try to present myself as the product rather than trying to push or flog the art. And of course, that means you've got to become your own public relations specialist, and you've got to push yourself forward. And of course, that's difficult as well, because authors are not famous, are they, for being big I am people.
I like how you change your thought about like, okay, let's not talk about the art as the product, but let's talk about myself, the artist, as a product. But then you still have to consider yourself as a product. So
then you have to, but you are the product. At least then your actual artwork isn't tainted by commercialization, but you are the person. I went to a conference a couple of 3 years ago, and they said, if you are an author, come in. That's why I always wear this thing. You can see on top of my head, I've got a dough rag. Everybody should have one thing that associates yourself. It associates everybody with you. It's saying, yes, I am an author, and I'm a bit different from everybody else, and I am the product. You're kind of taking away the commercialization taint from the art, which is the book, and you're making yourself the product which you want to promote.
Right. And how do you promote yourself? I know you do podcast interviews. Do you do other activities too?
Yeah, so I've got my own podcast, as you know, but I developed a thing that I call author positioning, which obviously for me feels less anxious than promotion and sales. So I like to position myself on my social networks. I've got quite a few followers on Instagram. I've got a little less than 10,000. I've got about 2,500 followers on Twitter, and I tend to discuss what I've been doing in the book, or tell a little story about how I come up with an idea. I create my own memes. I share some news. I share quotes from my books, share photos and things. And it's always about positioning myself. And if I've got a new book coming out, then I'll obviously try to meld those two things together, but in a way that I'm comfortable with. I think the important thing is I want to be comfortable with that. And that's the hard bit. I think that's the hard bit of being a self-published author. We can't be everything, can we?
No, we can't. What writing projects are you currently working on?
Well, I'm at the moment. So NaNoWriMo last year, I wrote a fiction on a castle set in medieval Wales. It's not fantasy fiction, although it has got all the elements of fantasy because it's a castle and it's got a princess who runs the castle. So that's got to be edited. And in June the 17th, publishing my Pattern Maker and the Tide, which has taken about 3 years to edit. And it's a book which touches on a heavy subject. It's human migration. Okay. And it's something that I dealt with when I was in law enforcement, but I tried to treat it with a light touch. So there's a little bit of lightness in it. And it's quite an unusual idea for a book, I think.
Is it still fantasy?
No, so that's my
drama?
loyalty and duty type.
Okay.
Yeah. It's about, I'll tell you what it's about. It's about an old man, white man, but he finds a baby, Arab baby on the beach. And what happens, I suppose I'm dealing with myself here as well. What happens when an old man finds a baby? A young lady across the street sees what he does, and she goes across to help. And of course, people then start hating her as well. So she gets a lot of hatred because she's trying to help the old man. Mm-hmm. Even the old man's family are saying, why is she getting involved? Is she a gold digger?
Okay.
So so you got all of those problems as well. So,
awesome. That sounds awesome. So this one will be launched when?
So that's June the 17th, and it's called Pattern
Okay.
Maker and the Tide.
Okay, good. And if people want to know more about you, about your books, where can they connect with you?
Yeah, you can. I'd like people to visit my author page on Amazon, which is just Neil Mach, Neilmach. My Twitter handle is at Neil Mach, all one word, Neilmach. And I'd love talking to other authors, and I'd like to get involved. And my website is neilmach, all one word, .me.
Thank you for sharing your experience and your expertise with me today. I'll make sure to share the links in the show notes if the listeners want to go check you out. Thank you so much for being on the show.
Thank you for having me. It's lovely to speak to you.